Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for coming today. So I guess I'll go into a little bit my background, how I've used FOIA and FOIL in the past, some of the ways that I think it's a really huge untapped resource, and some of the different challenges that I've come across using it, and how I'm trying to solve some of those challenges with FOIA Mapper. So I originally discovered FOIA at the time I was trading derivatives, insurance-linked derivatives on Wall Street, and unlike the stereotype of what a trader is, which is doing trades back and forth really quickly all the time, I was doing much slower transactions. So it would be 1 or 2 transactions a month, and really my job was much more about modeling at that time. So it was at the time when I first started using FOIA, I was modeling things like earthquakes and hurricanes, which is very data intensive. So I ended up spending a lot of time just probably spent 2 months where the single biggest piece of my day was just looking for information online. So yeah, in the course of doing that, one of the pieces of information I had a hard time finding was the information to calibrate the models I was building. So things about, it's very easy to see how much damage a hurricane does in aggregate, but when you're calibrating a hurricane model, you actually have to know on a very granular level how much damage it does. So that kind of information is really not available online. That's something that I found is actually available using freedom of information. So that was sort of my initial peek at freedom of information. After that, I started a real estate business, which was, I describe it usually as like Carfax for apartments, except in New York, a lot of people don't really know what Carfax is. It's probably the only place in the country that people don't know Carfax. But what it is effectively, before you move into an apartment, there's probably a lot of stuff that you would like to know that would affect your life living in that apartment that you really have no way of knowing beforehand. So something like, New York City noise is a very big problem, right? A lot of people move into an apartment and then discover either the traffic noise outside is a problem, and the walls are paper thin. You can hear your neighbor right next to you, and so just one example. But the business Revaluate, which I'm not involved anymore, but is still alive. For that, I used freedom of information to get most of the information for the website. It was pretty much based on freedom of information. And most recently, I do a lot of work with data visualization on my website, Metrocosm. So for that, I use freedom of information just in a variety of different ways. I think the most recent one I did was a map of New York City film locations. You just look around a map and you can see where each of the different movies was filmed, and what was filmed on each particular street. So just another way that I found freedom of information can be useful. So that's 3 different roles that I've had where freedom of information has played a very big part. So in my view, it's just an enormous untapped resource. There are very few people who are actually looking at freedom of information, and I know that because one thing you can do is you can request what they call FOIA logs. So you can see who has requested information from each agency and what they've requested. And when you do that, you can see that I'd say probably 80% of the requests that come in, both in the New York City and at the federal level, are from people that make requests very often. Right? So it's a very small number of people that are even looking at freedom of information. So my sense is that it is an enormous untapped resource. And just to give a few examples here, so most of you are probably familiar with the New York City Open Data, right? Which in theory is supposed to encapsulate all of the data sets that are in New York by any agency, right? But this is some of the stuff that I found when I was putting together Revaluate. So in this first example here, this is the 311 service requests. It's probably the most used data set on the New York City data portal. So just as a comparison, these here are all very similar data sets, which are about kind of generic service requests or complaints to different agencies that look very much like 311. And I don't believe, at least last I checked, none of these are on the open data portal. Right? And these ones combined are easily bigger than the 311 service requests. And by the way, I'll be putting this, I'll be posting this online, so feel free to take notes, but no need to. You can grab it later. Yeah, these are all data sets that I requested from different agencies that have very, very similar information to 311. So that's just a very generic example. But the other example here is noise, which I mentioned before. Just one other very more specific example. So you can find information about noise on the New York City Open Data Portal too, with the 311 service requests. And the ECB violations data set also has information about noise violations, so that can help you figure out which areas of the city have problems with noise. But there's also a ton of information that you can get about noise from other agencies, which is not on the Open Data Portal. And a lot of it comes from places that you really wouldn't expect. Like, for example, the State Liquor Authority. That's somewhere I would have had no idea they have information about noise, right? But it turns out that when they give liquor licenses to bars, they do a pretty thorough background check of whether the bar is complying with all the laws and whether it's bothering the community. So they actually have pretty detailed information about which bars in New York City are causing noise problems. So this is just kind of a more specific example, but just for a topic like noise, I want to know, whether there's a noise problem with this building. There are just a ton of different sources of information that are out there if you dig around and look for it. So something I've had in the back of my mind is, as I was going through this process of finding this information, I don't know what all your experience is with freedom of information, but actually drafting a request is very easy, right? Writing a freedom of information request is just, you find the email of the agency that you want to request it to, you describe what you want just in plain English, there's no special language needed, and that's it. So actually making the request is incredibly easy. It takes 2 minutes. The hard part that I found is actually first finding the information, like in this case, finding out that the State Liquor Authority has information about noise. And then I'd say the even bigger problem, which is not quite so apparent, is understanding exactly how to describe what it is you want. Right? So writing the request is very simple, but you actually have to know what it is you want and be able to describe it. So I guess I can give one example here. Across a while ago, this is New York City solar map. It has information about where solar panels are in New York City, and you can dig in a little bit further and actually see, you can see what the solar capacity is, potential solar capacity of each building, which is depends, I guess, on the height of the building and on, I don't know, I suppose whether it's blocked by any other buildings nearby, but it gives you an idea of how much sunlight hits each building. So this is information I was looking for, and I guess to sort of illustrate those two problems that I came across, if you didn't know where to find this, right, you would really have no idea where to look. Right? So if you want information on solar capacity, what is the first step to going out and finding where that information could be, whether the government does have information about it? Right? That's a pretty tricky problem. That's really takes a lot of time of just digging around on .gov sites and just trying to infer information based on different reports or other things you find on the website. But okay, so let's say you do find out. You say, so this one comes from, this I believe is hosted by one of the CUNY schools. So CUNY is subject to FOIA. Okay, so great. So you know that CUNY has the information you're looking for, right? Okay, so now what? Now you can send a request to the Freedom of Information officer over at CUNY. But if you were to just send a request saying, I'd like information on the solar capacity that CUNY has produced, right? That's a very difficult one for them to do anything with, because the person you're sending it to So, can you guys see this? Yeah, you can see this. Right? Okay, so this kind of gives you an illustration of actually what goes on here, right? So normally when you send out a request, you're kind of sending it into a black box, and it's kind of difficult to know what happens to that request when you send it in there. So this is you. You're sending in the request to this guy. So this guy is a dedicated FOIA officer. Okay. What he actually has to do is he has to go to the group internally that has the information. Right? So, for example, in this case, if we're talking about CUNY, he actually has to find, if it's a certain team or professor in there, he actually has to go out to the professor and say, here's the information that somebody requested. Can you please put that together? Right. So, going back to the example, yeah, you can't really just send in information just saying something, I want information about solar capacity, because the guy really was going to have no idea where to send it. He can't just blast an email around to everyone within CUNY. Okay, so let's take it a step further. So you look online, you dig around a little bit more, you find, okay, great. So it has this map here. This map is obviously pulling from some sort of database. Perfect. So now we know exactly what we want. We can send a request saying, I'd like the database that feeds into this map. And very often if you do that, that'll work. That's more specific. But here's the response that I got when I made this request. So I sent this request in. The response I got back was, yeah, this information is in a database. If we're going to get this out for you, we're going to need to hire a SQL programmer, database administrator, GIS expert, and that's going to cost us about $300,000 to do. It's for real. And you see this happen. This is the most extreme case I've ever seen, but you very often get these cases where, and by the way, this is not the fault of the freedom of information effort by CUNY, right? So this is not coming from the contact that I'm speaking with, the FOIA officer. This is coming from the guy that he went to get the information. Right? So he actually has to go bug somebody who's working on this map and say, yeah, I have this request guy here, can you please drop what you're doing and copy the database. Right? So the guy on the other side who, this is not his day job, I'm sure he doesn't want to be bothered with doing this, right? He comes back with something like this. This is what it's going to take to get the information out. For any of you that work with data, right? Copying a database is usually a few minutes, 10 minutes, I would say tops normally to do. If it's a really large database, it might take a little bit more time, but it's pretty easy to do. Okay, so what do you do in this kind of scenario? There are things you can do in this case to be able to get the information, but just to illustrate the point a little bit better, what would have been helpful here is if I had information about the database. Right? So this guy comes back and says, this is going to cost $300,000. I can argue it in the generic sense, saying no database could take, be this difficult to copy. But it would be much better if I knew exactly what kind of database it was. And I could say, okay, this is in a MySQL database. To copy a MySQL database, all you have to do is X, Y, Z. Or, I don't know. The more information you have about the database or about the record system that you're requesting, the more difficult it is for them to come back with responses like this to deny it. So really this is sort of just to sum up the point is, yes, there is a big challenge with finding out where the information is for you to request, but the even bigger challenge I found is understanding enough about the information to be able to describe it very specifically in your request. And if you have those two pieces, if you know where it is and you can describe it very well, then typically it's very easy to write the actual request, and it's very likely to be fulfilled if they do have the information. I'd like to go into how I'm trying to solve this problem with FOIA Mapper, but I thought take a quick detour here and kind of talk about some of my experience with FOIL and actually how I deal with cases like this, which might be helpful for you guys. So one thing that I found is very helpful, specifically in New York, is that very often you can get a lot of information by going to the tech agencies. So DoIt, I don't know if it's DoItt or DoIt, I don't know how they pronounce it, but they're one of the best agencies to work with in my experience. They've been really, really helpful. This New York City crime data, this is something that's now on the open data portal, so this is no longer relevant, but I was trying to get this information about 2 years ago when this NYPD crime map went live. And I sent a request out to the NYPD for the information, for the raw data that feeds into the map, and just didn't hear anything back for a long time. So I dug in a bit further, and I saw that, okay, this map was created by DoIt. So I sent a request to them, and 8 days later I got a CD back with the full information. What I actually got from the NYPD after 6 months was a CD with an image PDF that was truncated, so half the data was actually not even there. Yeah, very often DoIt will have information from some of the different agencies because they're the ones that built the infrastructure that they use to host the data. So they can be very helpful. And I mean, just given the nature of who they are, they're also very good at dealing with data and electronic requests. And by the way, so my experience is mostly with requesting electronic data, which is not the typical use of FOIA. So most of my examples here are in the context of requesting electronic information, but I mean, everything I'm saying here applies to every other kind of information as well. You know, FOIA is much more often used by journalists to find documents that identify wrongdoing or identify something surprising about what the government's doing. So most of this is electronic, but it applies to every kind of data as well, every kind of information request as well. This here is an example of MODA, and I can show you a little more about this here. So this was one of the best things I found digging around from requests. This is the data bridge system that New York City uses. So this was an initiative that MODA put together about 2 years ago, where they tried to bring together information from different agencies. It's a really good idea because you know, a lot of times different agencies will all have information about the same thing, right? If you have the New York City Fire Department, it's helpful for them to know where a building with certain kind of building violations are that could be fire hazards, right? But for the most part, there hasn't really been much of an attempt to sync up the different databases that different agencies have. So that's what this was, data bridge. So I requested the specifications of the data bridge database design. And I mean, it's I don't know if you guys can read any of this here, but it just incorporates tons and tons of information systems used by different agencies. And it documents pretty well what's in each of these databases. So going back to the example of the solar map, if I had this information about the solar map when I originally made the request, it would have been much more difficult for them to come back to me with something like what they did. So if someone comes back to you with a request like that, you know, this is going to cost you $300,000 to get this this database, and what's the next step? What do you do? Well, normally with Freedom of Information requests, you could submit an appeal, which in my experience has a pretty good chance of getting overturned if the determination is not good. But in most cases, you cannot appeal a fee estimate. So you're kind of stuck in a way. They're saying it's going to cost $300,000. There's not really anything you can do if they just stick to it. So one thing you can do is you can ask to speak to a technical contact. Actually, you know what? I would say above any of this, I would say the first thing is always best to speak to the FOIA officer. because very often by email they can come off kind of very technical and very official, but very often when you speak to them by phone, they'll be friendly and they'll be helpful, and so usually that can solve a lot of problems when you have something like this come up. But if that doesn't work, one thing I find is helpful is to ask to speak to a technical contact, someone who actually understands the database that you're trying to request information from. In that case, you can usually get from them the specifications of it. They can describe to you what they can do, what they can't do. It kind of gets past the lost in translation aspect of having someone in the middle who may not have a whole lot of technical experience and may not be communicating very well what the issue is on the other side. So that's something I always found very helpful. And then the next piece, and this I think sort of gets to a broader issue of just the general dynamic of power that's involved in freedom of information requests. When you first submit a freedom of information request, it feels a little bit like the other side has all the power because they can sort of make wild claims. They can say they don't have information when you know they do. They can make outrageous fee estimates to try to stop a request. They can take tons of time to come back to you. And there's not really a whole lot you can do unless you're willing to take them to court, which most people are probably not. But what you have on your side is that you can send requests to them that take very little time or effort on your side, and they do have to respond. I mean, there are some people in the past that have taken that to the extreme. There was a case a few years ago of somebody who was trying to get information from the U.S. Census, and I don't remember what it was. It was something, it wasn't even a big piece of information, and they just weren't giving it up. So the guy decided to submit 2 requests per day until they sent him the information. So he did. So for, I think, almost a year, the guy sent 2 requests in every day to the census for just random things. I'd like a screenshot of this file directory. I'd like a copy of this document. I am not advocating doing anything like that. I think that's really borderline on harassment, and that's not okay. But to some degree, I think that is something you can use to your advantage. And this is actually what I did on that particular request, is when they came back saying that's going to cost you $300,000, I said, okay, what I'd like you to send me is the documentation of the database. I'd like you to send me information about when this database was built and who built it. I mean, there's a number of different things you can request, but in general, if something is not making sense to you, if an agency is being difficult with a request like that about a database, there's a lot of information you can request to really get at what's inside that database. So yeah, these are just a few different examples, but if you send a few of these requests, you may get information back, and that can help you rewrite the request to be more likely to get the information next time. Or very often, once they get requests like this, they will come back to you and they'll say, it's probably more hassle for them to deal with these requests than it is to actually go back to the original one and work with you to be able to get the data. So anyway, this last couple slides I've talked through, really has very little to do with FOIA Mapper, but this is just some stuff I find helpful. I thought you guys might find helpful as well. So with FOIA Mapper, actually, I suppose it does have to do with FOIA Mapper. What I wanted to do with FOIA Mapper was this kind of information, things like documentation of databases, lists of record systems that government agencies have. This is very helpful information to be able to solve those problems that I mentioned. First, knowing which agencies have information about what, and enough information about how it's stored to be able to request it in a very specific way. So these are a few examples here of some of the information you can request. A FOIA log, by the way, I think I explained that a minute ago, but what a FOIA log is just a list of requests that the government agency has received in the past. So there's really, these are a few examples here, but there's tons and tons of information all over the place that can be helpful in this way. So what I wanted to do with FOIA Mapper is organize it in a way that it's helpful, so that you can actually pick a topic, search for it, figure out which agencies have it, and then dig in a little bit deeper to figure out more about how it's stored, so that you can better request it. Oh, and by the way, feel free to interrupt me at any time you're asking me questions or comments or anything.
I have a question.
Sure.
So if they deny a request, you can't apply for it immediately. Is there a period of time at which you wait 3 months, 6 months, and then you can again request the same information? Describing it differently or something of that sort.
Are you referring to an appeal or just requesting it again in a different way?
Requesting it again in a different way. If your appeal period is run out because of the timing issues.
I think there was one case where an agency came back to me once when I requested a piece of information again, and they said something about I can't request it because I already had, or I don't recall exactly. The short answer is I don't believe there's any restriction. I think you can request the information, and then if you realize the next day that, oh, I could have requested that in a more specific way or slightly different, you can send that the very next day, and then you'll have 2 requests on track. What the agency might do is they might consolidate them both if they're similar enough into a single request, but there's no period you need to wait before resubmitting a request. You can send them as often as you want. As it relates to appeals, I believe it's about 20 business days you have from when the request was denied that you can appeal. I know that's not your question, but yeah, so that's how it works.
Question: do you have pretty good luck just entering FOIA officer and whoever agency you're trying to draw that information from and getting a reasonably accurate contact email address? And
Yeah, that's not hard to do. Yes, yeah. Yeah, it's something that I have on here. I'll show you. So I put together the search here, which is the main functionality of the website, but you can also, yep. So this is the page for FEMA. And so, it's something that I put together here. You can look at different agencies and you can pull their information right off this website. In most cases, it's very easy to find. You can go onto their website and get it. In theory, they're all supposed to have their FOIA email contacts listed on the site. Some agencies don't have them listed. In New York City, I'm pretty sure the NYPD doesn't have it listed as one example, even though you can find it out there. But for the most part, yeah, they are listed. One good resource to go to, though, if you can't find the email contact, very often what they'll ask for is either, they'll ask you to either send it by mail or by fax, which can be a pain in the neck, and there's not really as good a record of a paper trail of the request you sent. So I prefer to send them by email. The good resource is Muckrock. If you go to muckrock.com, helpful website in a lot of ways for freedom of information, but they have information on the email addresses of FOIA officers that sometimes are not listed online.
can you spell that?
MUCK ROCK. Yeah.
This is kind of an obvious question, but they bank on setting up these hurdles so that you kind of go away. Is that like they've responded to the request and like I'm going to speed, I'm going to take fax and take mail. It's like these hurdles, so it's almost on you to overcome these.
Yes, it's a complex issue, and I can talk a little bit more about this. So, a lot of people complain about government transparency and about freedom of information officers, and pretty much any article you find online will be pretty negative, right? I've never seen any article online talking about what a great job agency Y is doing on their freedom of information requests. I actually have sort of a different view. I think that it's very easy to kind of stand back from this black box and say, oh, this is, I'm not getting the information as quickly as I want. These guys are doing a bad job. But I think when you really look into the dynamics of what's going on inside the agency, it becomes more clear where the issue is. So for example, I understand, this is not something I've verified myself, but I've been told by people that if you request information about drones from certain agencies, they'll tell you they don't have anything. You actually have to say unmanned aerial reconnaissance, whatever it is they call it. You have to use it by its very specific term.
Probably just do a text search.
What if you do a text search?
It's like they just do a text search somewhere.
So, but see, there's a lot of different possibilities. So I've heard that this is true, but there are a lot of possible reasons for why that could be. It could be that you're sending it to the FOIA officer, right, and he's doing a text search somewhere and trying to find out where it is, and he doesn't find it, right? And he just comes back to you and doesn't know where else to look and says, we don't have any information about drones. Okay, that's one possible explanation. Another possible explanation is that this might be the drone team here. So this might be a bunch of scientists who are actually involved in the drone flights and recording information, who may be very involved in their work and very busy, and the last thing they want to do is respond to a request to put together a bunch of data and send it over to somebody who's requesting it. Right? So maybe you ask for drones, you send it to the FOIA officer, he goes back to the person who actually works with the drones. Right? Maybe that guy is in a bad mood in the morning, and he comes back and says, we don't have any information about drones. Right? Now, in that case, the FOIA officer is sort of in a tough spot because, he knows that, yes, they do have information about it. He doesn't really feel comfortable coming back to you, but he only really has, he's not going to want to go in and harass the person internally who's actually dealing with this, right? Who may be really resistant to providing information. So that's another possibility. Third possibility is that it could be an actual policy of the government agency that we don't want to release any information about drones if we don't have to. So let's get a legal opinion about how narrowly we can define it and what we can do to technically comply with the law with giving out as little information as possible, right? So maybe it's an internal policy that says, unless they specifically request it by this name, don't give it out. And you do see emails like that. You can request emails about discussing FOIA, and some of the ones that have come out have had discussions like that. So yeah, to answer the question in general is, when you get things like that back, this is going to cost you $300,000, right? In that particular case, it was more from the group that was dealing with the database. It wasn't like any kind of policy like, we don't want to give out information, we want to make this difficult, right? It was some guy who's in the group that deals with the data and probably just doesn't deal with a lot of freedom of information requests and didn't want to deal with it. So yeah, short answer, there's a lot of different reasons why it can happen. So what I've built with FOIA Mapper, and by the way, this covers just the federal FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, not the New York FOIL, Freedom of Information Law. Hopefully it will include it. FOIL is the one that I'm more familiar with, but for now this is just the federal. So for example, let's say you were looking at environmental hazards.
Why did you decide to go with the federal FOIA instead of FOIL?
Well, because it's I guess kind of the lowest hanging fruit, right? There's the most information out there about it. The most people use it. It's sort of the one that I could get that would be helpful to most people with the least amount of work, right? And I think from there I'd like to dig in and deeper and go into some of the more local places. But
what makes it the lowest hanging fruit? In terms of like what?
Well, the lowest hanging fruit is if I were to do it for New York, for example, I mean, there's a lot of people who could use it, but not nearly as many people who would be interested in it, who I could speak to about it, as with the federal FOIA, right? So it's a much larger potential user base for the federal, and also the federal has it just has more information out there, right? So for the purposes of collecting the information that I'm using here, right, there's much more available for me to get for the federal than there is for New York. So, yeah, I'll show first the FOIA logs. So what I did to collect the FOIA logs is I went out to all the different federal agencies and I asked them for the last 2 years of requests that they had received. Some is available on the web page, on their web pages, but most you have to request. Am I okay?
You're great.
So just as an example, what are people requesting about Hillary Clinton?
Emails.
Yeah.
Of course.
I mean, it's a lot of information. So if it's a topic, if you're a journalist, for example, trying to figure out information about researching Hillary Clinton into saying, okay, what kind of information is out there about those emails, for example, you can go on here and you can see what are other people requesting about these emails. It can be helpful because one very practical way is if somebody has requested information before in the past and you want that information, those records are usually sitting there all prepared somewhere, ready to go out. So you can request it and you should be able to get it immediately. You just say, I want what this guy requested. And that's something that takes them no time to process. They should have it on file and they just take it and send it to you.
If you ask for Hillary Clinton versus Hillary Rodham Clinton, would you get different results?
In this search or in a request itself?
In a request.
I don't think so, no. I mean, it's always better to be more specific. In that case, I think...
Can you use Boolean operators?
Well, sometimes what you can do is you can request, like if you want to request emails, you can say, I'd like all emails sent from person Y matching this search. Any emails containing, quote, Hillary Rodham Clinton. So if you did that, they would do a search, yes, very specifically for Hillary Rodham Clinton, in which case there would be a difference. Yeah, so I suppose in the context of email, yes, there would be. I think what you normally want to do is request both. You'd say any emails containing Hillary Rodham Clinton or Hillary Clinton. So yeah, the other way this can be helpful is just going back to the original problems that I pointed out. You can actually see which agencies have information about what by seeing whether people have requested them, and by seeing how they requested them, you can get a much better sense of how you can request it yourself. So that's the FOIA log search. The record system search. So let's say you're looking for information about environmental hazards. Okay, so there's a lot of data that comes back.
How did you build this list?
So this comes from the National Archives. What they maintain is what they call the record disposition schedules. So every agency, for any record they maintain, they have to submit for approval the amount of time that they have to maintain the records, and then what they do with those records after that time period ends. So some databases that are temporary, like I think, for example, the FOIA logs that I just showed, those usually agencies will maintain for something like 5 years, and then they will destroy them. In other cases, they'll maintain data for, say, 10 years, and then they will send it to the National Archives to be stored long-term, and they'll get rid of it. So for every record system that an agency stores, they have to submit for approval a disposition schedule, and within that, the document that they put together with the schedule, I can show you. So this is the environmental compliance and management data system. You can see that they go into detail about what's in the data system, what files it contains. Let's see, where's the, the purpose of, I put this on here is not specifically for the disposition schedule, but if you dig into it, you can find what the schedule is. It'll give some time period where they have to maintain it and then what they do afterward. So yeah, short answer is it's these record schedules. This is just one example. There's a number of other examples too that I'm in the process of getting right now that also have information about data systems.
Have you seen requests that pertain to a company? Say you wanted to know an environmental record of a company out there, any company, Exxon. Can you ask about company data that pertains to a company?
Yeah. I would say that the same idea applies as I was just describing before. I mean, if you were to just send a request saying, I'd like all the information you have on Exxon, that's going to be very hard for the Freedom of Information Officer to know what to do with. But if you ask for something specific, I would like all of the environmental violations in the CERCLIS database naming Exxon. Right? That's something that you can absolutely get. And I mean, you can see Exxon. Yeah, so I mean, here's just a few examples. Yeah, you can see some. These are requests people have made for Exxon. Yeah, so just to kind of round out what it is you can do with these record schedules is going back to the solar map example. I mean, that one in particular is not in here because that's not a federal record. But if to say for it were, you could go in there and you could see very, very detailed documentation about how exactly those records are stored, who has them, and that would have been very helpful with making the request, right? So that kind of information, I think, would have prevented a response like the one I got. Okay, so that's pretty much what FOIA Mapper does. There's a little bit more on here, but the main functionality is really those two things. It's searching the record systems and searching the FOIA logs.
How up to date are the logs? So you made a request and you get the information back and then you upload it.
How up to date are they?
Yeah.
It's all over the place. In some cases the information's on the website. So if it's say up to 2014, I probably would not spend the time making a request right now. I mean, this is all very much a work in progress. My intention going forward is if this continues to build the way it is, I think probably it would make sense to submit them on a regular basis and do it on some kind of put together some kind of system for keeping them updated as often as possible. But right now, it's really just kind of ad hoc.
There's no way that the U.S. government would give you automatic feed to this information. You have to go through this.
Yeah. Well, some agencies are very good about posting them. I think it's the FTC posts them every 2 weeks. So theirs are pretty well up to date. So some agencies are pretty good about it. I don't think they would take the time to set up a feed in response to what I asked for, but I don't think there's anything that would stop them from doing it. I mean, if it's something that a lot of people were requesting, and they could avoid having to respond to each and every request by setting up a single feed, I imagine they would have no problem with doing that in most cases.
I mean, the vendor that most federal agencies use, FOIA Express, they're not super thrilled with the idea of just spitting out a feed of the data. They'd certainly continue to charge out the nose for federal agencies if they wanted a feed of that data. But there's no API. Like, agencies don't even have direct access to this stuff. It's a managed service. What about FOIA Online though? Have you?
Yes. So yeah, some of the FOIA logs come directly out of FOIA Online. For FOIA Online, I'll just show you guys quickly just what it is. A few agencies have do their requests in this public FOIA data portal, which there's talk of setting one up like this for every agency, but right now it's just a few. So you can submit your requests here, or you can. These are the agencies that are in there. You can search by keyword, and once you pull up a request, you can actually download the records that were sent out in most cases.
Yeah, does New York State have an equivalent of that FOIA online for New York State?
It seems to I think New York announced. Didn't New York City announce?
So New York State is going to build one in a couple of months. They're going to launch it very slowly. First, they're just going to have a central list of all the FOIL officers. Then they'll have a way to send a FOIL request to every FOIL officer, and then they'll have a way to track all the FOIL requests. They're going to roll that out over the course of a year. New York City just launched Open Records, which is a similar sort of thing. You can file requests at every city agency, and the city agencies are going to manage more and more of their requests on that portal.
It's something that's been debated for a long time, both in New York City and at the federal level. There's actually a pretty good argument, I think, against it. This is a topic I've debated with a lot of people. On the one hand, it seems like, yes, it's a win-win if the information's up there and it's being paid for by tax dollars. So and by the way, one Freedom of Information request costs about $500 a piece. So they're not cheap.
Is that the federal or the city?
What I was looking at was a study that was all sorts of different agencies. Some are much more, some are less. That was just sort of a generic survey of different agencies. So yeah, it applies to the city as well.
With FOIA Mapper, what's your intent? Is it to show new functionality to the federal government so that way they adopt these types of ideas? Is it to create, do you have a product roadmap in the future that you want to develop?
Well, on the first question, the answer is no. It's not to try to get the government to take any kind of action. The purpose is to make Freedom of Information requests more transparent, more accessible for more people. Just at a very abstract level, it's something that I see as a huge untapped resource, and but one that's very difficult to get information out of. So, ultimately, what I'd like to see is Freedom of Information become more like what open data is right now. It's actually much larger. There's actually much more information available through FOIA than there is on the open data portals. So, just in a very abstract sense, I would like it. It's never going to be anything like quite as accessible as open data, but something approaching that is what I would like to do. This project, I didn't go into much about the history of FOIA Mapper, but this is a project that is funded by the Knight Foundation Prototype Fund. So at the end of last year, I submitted the idea. It's something that had been in the back of my mind for a while, that there's all this information sitting out there that can be helpful with making Freedom of Information requests. So I submitted it to the competition just as kind of a very abstract idea. And I ended up winning a small grant to build the tool. But yeah, in terms of future direction, it's still sort of abstract. This is the first iteration I put together, and part of what I'd like to hear from you guys is thoughts on the direction to take it. So feedback on the website itself is great, but also feedback on what you think about a good direction to take it would be. Right? What other information would be helpful? Does it make sense to set something up as a collaborative process? Some people have expressed interest in that. Other people have mentioned that it would be helpful to have records online, that maybe that could be more of a focus. So any thoughts you guys have in that regard would be great.
I just have another question. I think this is great, very interesting, potentially super useful and all that. I'm wondering, this is just kind of a background question, like, with all the new open data, relatively recent open data laws and policies that have recently come online and are continuing, what's preventing this information that's in FOIA, that's considered FOIA information or FOIL information, not to be put on open data portals? Like, is there something that qualifies it that makes it particularly different, particularly sensitive, something like that, or is it just a matter of time and resources and labor until that data actually does get onto it?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, right? Because in theory, if you read the open data law, I think it's local law 11, what it says is that any agency data set needs to go up on the open data portal. And the way it defines data set is incredibly generic. So by reading that, you would say, okay, nothing eventually is even going to be available in FOIA. And by this is only when it comes to data, right? Of course, there's information that's available through FOIA that's like documents and other things like that. But as it relates to data, yes. If you look at the law verbatim, you might reach the conclusion that FOIA is no longer going to be relevant at some point and that everything is going to be available through open data. The reasons that I would argue that's not the case is because FOIA, I mean, first, the breadth of what it applies to is huge, right? If someone working in a government agency maintains a spreadsheet that, who knows, the guy, if they maintain a spreadsheet storing data on their own computer, right, that's unlikely to ever get up on the open data portal, but that's something that is that you can request through FOIA. You can also request information. Very often, information will be produced by a third party, like FOIA Express is the company that maintains the FOIA systems, the systems the agencies use to track FOIA requests. If in the past, when I've requested information about those requests from agencies, they've actually had to go to FOIA Express and ask them to do the work exporting it. So actually getting to the step of where that information is on the open data portal, I think is not very likely. And then separately, I think, just knowing how government agencies function, there is so much information maintained by so many people in so many different ways, and it's changing so often that I just can't imagine. How they could ever coordinate something where it's all together. Just the examples that I gave in the presentation. Right? In theory, yes, all that information should already be, all those record systems I listed. Yeah, in theory, those should all be on the open data portal, but they're not, I suppose, because it's just a huge process of going through and figuring out every single piece of data that anybody in the entire agency maintains. And yeah, maybe some of those little by little will end up on the open data portal, but just in the same way that open data is growing, so is the information that's maintained offline. It's also growing very quickly. So my guess is that it's going to continue to grow the same way that open data is growing.
How do you know which databases exist offline? Is that a FOIA request, or how do you figure out what's?
Yeah, well, I mean that's part of what I'm trying to solve here is these record systems. Right, these are not all databases, but in theory, every database should be mentioned in one of these record system lists. So that's one way of finding it. Another way of finding it is agencies are required to post their, at the federal level, they call them major information systems, which doesn't cover everything, but covers the biggest systems that agencies use. So that's one way of finding them. In New York City, I think that's called the subject matter list. So that's another way of finding them.
And is there a federal level equivalent to DoIt and NODA? Are there federal analogs to those two?
It's a good question. It seems to me there are cases in the past when I have been able to kind of go through a back door to find information. But offhand, I don't think there is one agency like that maintains the systems of all government agencies. Another one, by the way, in New York City is the Department of Finance. They have a lot of information for sort of a different reason. But anytime anybody pays a fine for anything, all the money flows through them. So anything that involves the flow of money in one way or another goes through the Department of Finance at some point. So they have information about a lot of different things.
Federal equivalent of MODA and DoIt would be 18F, the U.S. Digital Service, and OMB would probably be they're the OMB and the Office of General Services, OGS.
Which one is it?
GSA, thank you, the General Service Administration. So the GSA, they're the umbrella organization for 18F. So you have good luck going through them as the techie backdoor to like MODA.
My question is more general about so what? Like it's basically you have a great tool, but then do you help users kind of like your key learnings as far as a user going through this, and like do you teach them? Do you help the users kind of like navigate these things and to find the information they want? So the question is, right?
Yeah.
But do you help them with the learning curve?
Yeah. It's tough. It's a tough question. So the FOIA log search, like that one I think is pretty straightforward, but I don't think that one has the same depth of information as being able to search through the actual record systems. But you're right. Like it's without any of this, like traditionally it takes a lot of digging to find the information. Here, it sort of points you in the right direction, but you still have to do a lot of digging through those documents and figuring out which ones are relevant. So you're right. So it's an issue that I would like to address. You know, what I've done at the moment is, I've gone through one single example of how I used it to find information about immigration or illegal border crossings, I think it was the example. Right, so in that case, I go through a few cases of, okay, here's what you can find in the document that tells you this and this about the records. But no, as a general matter, it's tough. I would like to find a way to make it simpler and to be able to explain it in a way that is that doesn't take a lot of work to figure out.
Have you open sourced the project so other people can improve it and make it better, or open your own data?
I would love to do that, actually, yeah. I'm not a developer, right? So I know how to program. I studied computer science in school. I can program a little bit in JavaScript and PHP, but I am by in no means a developer. I may be the only programmer person not to have an account on GitHub. So in concept, I would love to be able to take this and allow people to build on it. And a few people have asked me about that. Yeah, I mean, in practice, it's something that I'm not exactly sure where to start. Part of it also is that a lot of the challenge here is extracting information from PDF documents, which for those of you that have not done it, it's likely a lot more difficult than you would expect. So that's something that you know, there's no single code that I'm aware of that you can use to do that. That's kind of a manual process inherently. But for the site itself, if anybody wants to help me do it, I would love to make it open source and allow people to build on it and to expand it.
If one of your goals is to facilitate and encourage more people to make FOIA requests and stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
I think this is good, right?
Yes. Yep.
So what about like being able to direct people just to like click here to send a FOIA request to this agency, like a whole list, you know, I mean, there's like boom, like, I mean, I've only submitted a FOIA request once, but you know, the idea of, well, how do I do this was kind of intimidating for a minute but then it was really easy, but like if it was actually just, you know, I think it would break down the barrier between doing it.
Yeah, you're totally right. I mean, so I do have a little bit here explaining how to do it, right? And kind of showing here's the steps for doing it. But the solution that you're describing, which I think is a great solution, that's what Muckrock does. So the website that I mentioned before, that's what they do. Is you go on there, you put in the agency, It'll fill out most of the request for you, and you just enter a little bit about what you're looking for, and it does the rest.
So they do, but what about like directing, somehow, like directing the user to the site, to the page on the home agency's site or something like that, so that you don't go through some other agency, actually just go, I don't know how to do this actually in terms of technology, but like, you know what I mean, so you don't have to go through some external agency, you actually go through the one you want, but you kind of get, you show them how to get there or something. So
When you say external agency, you're talking about Muckrock, or you're talking about?
Yes, that's what I mean.
Yeah, well, I mean, they do a very good job of what they're doing, right? So it's not something that I think even makes sense for me to try to do what they're doing. So, I mean, on their page, all it is maybe it makes sense for me to just link directly to the specific agency page on their website where you can type it in. But I mean, it's really pretty straightforward. And when it comes to actually submitting the request, there are some challenges to it, but I mean, this example right here, all you do is you get the FTC email, which you can find on the FTC page of the site, and you paste in, you just say, "Dear FOIA officer, I want XYZ. Thank you." And that's really it. So there's really not that much to it. I mean, you're right. It would be nice if I don't know, if it was integrated with Muckrock in that sense. It would be kind of one step easier. But there's really not much to it.
I'm sure Muckrock does this, but it's interesting because actually she did it in my class, and I actually told her that she was wasting her time. It was a 4-week class, and I'm like, "You're not going to get the response in time," and she got it in like a few days, which is amazing. We will track how expected return based on user, as people are doing more of these requests, to say this will be okay. I think metrics like that's important for people who will, I really need this data, but I don't want to wait 6 months, and you realize, oh wait, those agencies actually will return it in like a week or so.
Yeah, so that's something that I've spent some time, let me see.
Even just your anecdotal experience from and what you know about agency responsiveness could be very helpful.
Yeah, so they actually publish pretty good data about this, and it's something that I've been meaning to go through in more detail. But just at a very high level, I mean, it's something that I have up here. So you can see what it takes for simple requests, what it takes for complex requests. Yeah, this is actually technically this is not the FEMA. This is for the parent department. The information is available for FEMA as well, but FEMA, the 103,000, which is just crazy, is the Department of Homeland Security.
Great. Thanks, Max. Please give Max feedback as much as possible.
Thank you very much.
That's great.